So we are recording. So today we begin our journey into JavaScript. And I think as we mentioned in the beginning, right, everything we kind of do in these 12 weeks is layering on top of each other. So even though we're venturing into JavaScript land today, we won't be leaving HTML behind, and we certainly won't be leaving CSS behind. So you'll hopefully see as we go through this week, you're still using the skills you've picked up so far in HTML and CSS, and you'll have time to continue to revise those skills. So hopefully you won't feel like, oh, my one chance to practice HTML and CSS is gone, right? In a full stack program like ours, we're building to the point where you are building the design of something to some extent, the HTML and CSS for that, the JavaScript that powers the front end, and then in the third unit, the back end that's going to be supplying the data for your front end. So our first glimpse of what full stack might tend to look like will happen this week and next as we start to build logic into our front ends and integrate that with data. Right. So we've been building some websites along the way. Some things that are mostly like marketing or informational display websites. Primarily what we're going to work on from this point out is more application style things. So they'll still be about displaying information, but it's primarily going to be about displaying information that's generated dynamically. Right? That's kind of the current state of what we're working on, is building dynamic applications. So when we talk about building applications or building, when we talk about building applications, we're working with both data and behavior. And you'll hear me use this term, you'll hear others use this term. We may call those two things different things along the way. Data and behavior will get called different things. And at some point we might call them like state and methods, right? Or data and functions. But those two things really comprise most of what we're working with as developers. We're keeping track of information, and then we are doing things with that information or responding to events that the world is asking us to do. Right? Think of your website's login form. Right? You go to Facebook, right, and you want to log in. It's asking you for some information, your username, or your email, and then your password. Then there's already some behavior. You click on a button that says log in, and it asks Facebook, hey, is this Frank's email address and his correct password? It's got to look it up somewhere, figure out if that's the right password, make a determination if you got it right or if you got it wrong. If you got it right, let them into Facebook. If you got it wrong, send them back to the login page. That's the data, the information, and the behavior of that page. And that's primarily, at the end of the day, really all that's going on in programming. Everything else is a complication of the language or the framework or the syntax that we're doing. But if you can remember that what we're tracking is data and behavior, that's really the key thing. And you're going to see today and this week and next week's as we get into frameworks, that's all that's really happening just in a different guise. Let's dive into JavaScript for the first time. So today's a day, if you want to follow along as we do these things, you're certainly welcome to. Again, as Frank, you said in stand-up this morning, certainly if you find that the pace that we're going, right, kind of exceeds your keeping up, drop back and take notes, right? Or like mark down spots along the way. You're like, oh, when Gavin said this is something I really want to go through, and then come back and review. But what we're going to do today you all should feel comfortable coding along with. So everything that I do for today is going to be in week 2, day 1. You're welcome to do this work inside of your SDG Unit 1 folder. So I'm going to build a new app for today, but instead of alpha, we're going to introduce beta. So last week we did app alpha. This week we're going to do app with a beta. I'm going to make a little project called Intro to JavaScript. So this is going to be a lot like our projects that we created last week, except you'll notice that there's one extra thing in here. It used to say vanilla stack HTML. Now we get JavaScript included. I'm saying no because I'm putting this inside of an existing repository. So I want all of this code to be in my Cohort 12 repository I'm creating with you. You can choose to say yes, or you could choose to say no. If this is something you're like, I don't want this cluttering my GitHub, you can say no. If you're like, I want to save this and make sure it's on my GitHub forever and ever, then you can say yes. I say no because I'm already in a repository.
You can always delete something from GitHub later, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, you can always come back and delete the project later. It's a code change I want to make to app that if you're already inside of a repository, I shouldn't ask you if you want another repository. So I've made my intro to JavaScript. I have app. I'm going to do the standard cd into intro to JavaScript. Here's my cd intro to JavaScript. I'm going to run code.
There shouldn't be an issue. I just used when it asked my title would be just intro. I hit yes.
Yeah.
No problem.
And I'm going to npm start. So pretty standard, nothing's changed here with how we go into our folder, run our editor, and launch our browser. Wanted to show, if y'all ever have challenges with the full screen stuff, I want to show you another way of getting into the side-by-side browser mode. If you just click one time the green, this is for our Mac friends, the green icon, you'll get full screen. And the 3-finger swipe up will give you mission control. You'll see at the top I have desktop here, and I have code here. I can then grab my window, and then I can drag and choose which side I want it on. You may find that a slightly easier way of dealing with full screen. Up to you. Right, the first way was we clicked and held on the green button and then dragged the window where we want. This one is just clicking once on the green button to get code full screen, and then doing a 3-finger swipe up and then dragging the companion window we want on the side. Okay. Kind of up to you. Yes, you did not do CD first. Nope, because you see how you're still in unit 1. See how here. Let's see. Nope. So intro to JavaScript is the name of the project, but you see how it said, hey, that was an error. Could not. So the name of the folder is intro-to-JavaScript.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I'm gonna exit out of this and then go back in, just because I want to show you something. So here's a top tip. So I'm in my folder, and I know I just created my app project. And I know I called it Intro to JavaScript. You notice that when I type in file names, like I know I want to cd and I want to go into Intro to JavaScript, I will type INT. I'm going to hit the tab key. And it will type the rest of it for me. So you have autocomplete in your terminal as well. So you'll find that I rarely type cd intro-to-javascript. So why would I want to? Right? The computer's going to do work for me. If I type in enough letters to uniquely identify that directory or folder, when I type cd and I type I, right, I get intro to JavaScript.
If it's not enough letters, so you have
Yeah.
several intro, what does it do?
Yeah, it'll beep. Let me go back here.
Hold tab and then.
No. So these are two different concepts.
Oh, okay.
So we did one thing, we reset. Now we're doing another. Let's go back to here and see that I have two weak directories. If I type cd and a w and I hit tab, it'll fill in as much as it can. So what I typed here, I'm now introducing shortcuts in terminal. So if I type cd and I have w, I'll hit tab, and the terminal will try and guess as much as it can of the file name. It says, hey, I figured out that w could either be week 1 or week 2, week-01 or week-02, and it's waiting for me to type the rest. So if it can guess the entire thing, it'll guess the entire thing. If it can't, it'll guess as much as it wants, and then I'll say 2, right, and there's my slash. Here there's only a day 1, so if I type in D, right, D will complete all of day 1. So it will guess as much as it can of the name of the folder.
When we type beta at the top at app, that launch a different style program that allows us for JavaScript?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The first one we could do JavaScript in the first in alpha. Beta just adds a couple of things that help us out. So to review again, Toby, what we were talking about earlier was when I run code and I run npm start, if I want my screen to be, if I want to do the side-by-side splitting, I have two choices. I can click and hold the green button without moving it, and then pick side to side,
Right.
and then click the other. The other way to do it and maybe folks will find this easier.
You can just hit that button on your keyboard, right?
So let's say my screen was like this, right? I can click this green button one time, and now my code is full screen. Then I can take my 3 fingers and 3-finger swipe up from the bottom of my trackpad to the top. So a 3-finger swipe from the bottom will give us this mission control screen.
Right.
And what it's showing me is I have two views of my world. I've got my desktop, and I have my code that is full screen. And then I can pick any window I want, any application that's running, Slack, my terminal, my browser, and then click and drag it up to where code is running, and then pick which side I want the browser to be on. Now I'm going to pick to put the browser on the right-hand side, and now it's split. Here this is. So just 2 different ways on the Mac of doing the split screen. So you'll notice that here in app beta, our app looks a little bit different. Right? It has this world. It says "Hello World!" ! Question mark. We're going to get to why that is in a second. Question?
Yeah, I hope this doesn't throw us too off track, but so beta is something that you all made up.
App is something we completely made up. App is a tool created by Jason Perry that we use to make it easier for you to generate projects. So we don't have to load. Do you feel like we've loaded a ton on you already? Yeah. If we made you do what app is doing, it would probably take us 3 days just to get to the point where you could start typing code.
So is alpha and beta like terms that you created?
They're
or is that something you'll always
well, it's like, you know, when you hear like, hey, the beta version of something is coming out, right? Alpha, beta are typical programmer terms for successively more complete versions or successively more complex versions of something.
Well, what I'm saying is you could have called them something else. So
Absolutely.
Like you created those, is what I'm saying.
We didn't.
You didn't create the terms.
Yes, we chose to use those terms right? We could have called it app-app-1, app-app-2, or A, B, and C. We chose alpha and beta because they relate to the alpha release of software, the beta release of software, and so forth. Correct. So here's our code and our browser. Anybody having a challenge getting to here if they're trying to follow along? Cool. So as I said, this has some tools in it to help us with JavaScript. But if we want to play around with JavaScript, one of the easiest ways is if we go to our inspect view, and rather than work in the Elements tab where we have been working, right, we've been kind of in this tab here where we can look at different elements and we can look at our CSS. Now we're going to start working in the console view. So at some point we're going to work in many of these tabs, but primarily you're going to spend your time between these two, Elements and Console. So you'll notice that when we go to Console, we get a little prompt here, a blue grid on its line, and a blinking cursor. Kind of looks like Terminal, right? In Terminal, we had a little prompt, right? It had your computer name or your name and a $, right, and a cursor. And now we are in something that looks very similar inside of our browser. Well, we're inside of here, and it's the same thing that we're inside of when we're in Terminal. And the same thing for those folks who do Ruby will be in a tool in Ruby that's the same. .NET doesn't quite have this, but it has something similar. We're inside something called a REPL, an R-E-P-L, a REPL. And you'll hear users say like, hey, or developers like, drop into the REPL for a second and let's play with some code. Right? So programmers love acronyms. In this case, this is an acronym. I just learned the difference between an acronym and an initialism. Yeah. So an acronym is something where you shorten a word into individual abbreviated letters, but then you pronounce it. An initialism is like the FBI, right? We don't say the FBI, right? But we do say NASA. So NASA is an acronym, but FBI is an initialism. I did not know that until like a month or so ago. So REPL is an acronym, and it stands for the Read, Evaluate, Print Loop. Right? So think about when we were doing things in Terminal, it was waiting for us to type commands at it. It was reading our commands, right? CD space intro to JavaScript, right? It was reading what we were typing. It would then evaluate what we asked it to do. It might print something out like an error or a success, and it would loop back around and ask us for more information. And that's the idea of this REPL. You can think of them as like your interactive session with your programming language. Right? The terminal and your shell is an interactive session with your computer, right? With the file system and the programs you're running. This REPL here, read, right? It's waiting for us to type some words. It's going to evaluate what they are. It's going to print some output and then ask us for more typing. This is an interactive session with the JavaScript programming language that's built into our browser. This console, just like the Elements view is available on any site, this console is also available on any site you go to, right? And sometimes you'll find very interesting things inside of consoles. Like if we go to Reddit, this isn't a good example. Oh, pretty. And we go to inspect, and we go to the console. I think this is still here, right? Part of what they do is they print out the little Reddit guy right at the bottom of their console, right? All kinds of interesting things at the bottom of consoles in various apps. So like as you're cruising around the internet, every once in a while, like pop open the console. We're gonna see these error things, like see what errors or like messages these different consoles pop up on different sites. I've been to a few places where like hidden job offers are inside of the console at websites. Like, hey, you're digging around the console in our app. You seem like you're an interesting developer. Like, here's the secret link to the application form for developers that isn't on the main page of the site. Maybe. So this is where we can interact with the JavaScript world, and we're going to see in a little bit we can also interact with the page itself. So before we get that, we've got to learn a couple of different parts of the syntax of the JavaScript programming language. So by syntax, we mean the rules around which we can type things to JavaScript and ask it to do things on our behalf. Right? We learn syntax in HTML, that every tag starts with and is surrounded by the greater than and less than brackets. Right? We learned that they have to be nested with opening tags and closing tags, and CSS has the opening brace and the closing brace. JavaScript itself has its own syntax. If you have some experience with JavaScript, we may teach you a different way of syntaxing with JavaScript, because we're trying to work on teaching you kind of the current most modern style of JavaScript. So if you're used to, or you've done some pre-work, or you've done some background work, and you've learned some JavaScript, kind of pay attention to the differences of the things that we're about to introduce, and try and stick to this style. For those who have little to no experience with JavaScript, yay, you don't have any existing habits we've got to like break you of before we can build your current stuff. So let's start with the simplest thing we can do in pretty much any programming language. Let's assign a value to a variable. So I said that programming is data and behavior. We're going to start on the data side for a little bit. Right? We're going to ask JavaScript to keep track of some information, and then look at the things we can do with that information. So let's do this. Let's type the let keyword. So this is one of the first keywords we're learning, is the let keyword. And let tells JavaScript that we're about to assign a variable. We're about to allow some name of something to equal a value. So go ahead and do let name equals single quotes and your own name. You can use my name if you want, but use your own name if you want. Let name equals quote Gavin. Let's break this line down a little bit. We said that the let keyword here tells JavaScript we're about to assign a variable to a value. On the left-hand side of the equals here is the name of the variable. I just happen to call it name. The equal sign says put the value that's on the right-hand side into the variable on the left-hand side. So we're telling JavaScript to remember in your memory that there is a variable called a name, and the value is my name, Gavin. And you can press enter to have that run. And you'll notice that it printed something to us. Right? It printed something to us in a light gray. It printed to us undefined. The result of assigning a variable doesn't print anything, and in JavaScript, the way we show that is undefined. We're going to talk about the printing part in a second. So if we ask JavaScript, hey JavaScript, what's inside of name? We just type in name. You can already see that the console is pretty powerful. It's trying to do like autocomplete for us, and it's giving us like a little preview of what the result of this would be in like this light red below. So if you just type in name and press enter, you'll see that JavaScript said, hey, I know what name is. You told me, you defined what name is, and I'm going to give it back to you and say, well, that's Gavin, or Frank, Toby, or Michelle, or whatever you put in. Notice that it gave it back to me. You see anything different between what it gave back to me and what I gave it?
Double quotes.
Yeah, double quotes or single quotes. So in JavaScript, double quotes and single quotes are identical. There's nothing different between single quotes and double quotes, other than single and double quotes. The style that we're sending you towards is using single quotes for typing them in your programs. In fact, I think on the first day when we had you set up prettier, or the second day when we had you set up prettier, I turned on an option that says turn your double quotes into single quotes. So the style we'd like you to do is just start to use single quotes in your JavaScript program. So I will type single quotes, but know that JavaScript can do double quotes or single quotes, and it'll be just as valid for the browser to say single quotes here as it does double quotes. They don't They don't distinguish themselves between single quotes and double quotes. So we asked what name is, and it said, oh, I know that variable. You told me about that variable before, and I know that it holds this value called Gavin. This value is a string. It's a sequence of letters. So a string in JavaScript is a sequence of letters, my capital G, little a, V, I, N. But that's not the only kind of variable we could hold. We could assign something that holds a number. So I don't know if you have a favorite number. I have a favorite number. If you don't have a favorite number, make one up or use mine. Bonus points, fake bonus points if you know why that's my favorite number.
Because it's an asterisk. It's a checker's guide to the galaxy.
It's a checker's guide to the galaxy. It's the answer to life, universe, and everything. The answer is 42.
So does the N need to be capital?
It does not.
Okay.
It does not need to be capitalized. But this is another stylistic thing that I'd like you to start doing as a JavaScript developer. You're going to find that each language has its own way of styling things. All right, it's kind of like we have like the AP guide to writing in English, right? People who follow the Oxford comma and people who don't, right? The Oxford comma is, you know, I went to the store and I got apples, comma, bananas, comma, and milk. Right. Or do you put that comma in before the and? So in JavaScript, when we have a variable name that's a compound word, it's two words together, favorite number, we will say little f in the first word and capital N in the second word. You'll find that if I was writing Ruby, I would write this. This is how Rubyists would type this. And .NET folks would tend to write something like this. Right? In JavaScript, though, we're going to start doing this.
It'll throw an error if you do a capital F, wouldn't it? If you capitalize.
I don't know. No.
Oh, it works?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. There are rules for what your variables can have. For instance, they can't start with a number, right? They can't have a 3 favorite number,
right.
But they can be capital or lowercase.
You can't put any number in a variable name, right?
I can put a number anywhere in the variable name besides the first character.
Okay.
Right? I could say my 3rd favorite number with a number 3, and that would work. It just can't be the very first letter. So if I say let favorite number be 42, and it comes back undefined, if I ask for it back, right, it says, okay, cool, 42. And you'll notice here, this 42 right, doesn't have quotes around it, because JavaScript knows, well, that's a number. It's different than a string, right? It's different than a word, a sequence of letters. This is just a regular old number. Favorite number is 42. So I'm going to clear the console so things aren't at the bottom, right? But you don't have to do this if you don't want to. I'm just going to clear the console and ask for a favorite number again. So if I can ask for information back from JavaScript, I can also do math on these things. I can ask what is favorite number plus 1. And you can already see it's previewing 42, 43. I can multiply it. I can multiply it by itself, right? So JavaScript is saying, hey, if I take favorite number and I look up what that is, I get 42. And then the asterisk means multiply.
So I noticed that you put in space before and after the multiplication sign.
Yes.
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
Why we're doing
stylistically. So a lot of these things are the same kind of stylistic things you will find in like writing guides. If you were ever a writer, right, or like you had a high school English teacher that enforced, right. If you're older like me, I don't know if they still teach this, right? Typing in school, right? And they taught you like every time you have a period in a sentence, it's 2 spaces before you start the next sentence. It's those kinds of things. We do this because the computer doesn't care, but I, as a reader of your code, care. Right? Here's a silly truth. Code is read far more often than it's written. Right? Code tends to get written once or twice. Right? You're working on code. But people like yourself or your teammates are going to come by and read your code way more often than you're going to spend time writing it. So I say something like, pretend like you're writing code, giving variable names, leaving comments, spacing things, right? As if the intended reader is like a homicidal maniac that knows where you live, right? Like write your code nice so like you keep the people who come after you happy, right? So putting a space in here makes no difference to the computer, right? But if I start writing right, that just looks like a jumble of stuff to me, right? Just when my eye lands on this line, right, it comes out to be 1230. But if we put a little bit of space in here, right, oh, okay, I can start to make sense of what's going on here. So if we can do a little bit of math. Oh, let me also show you the symbol for division, right? So division is a slash. And so I say take favorite number, and I divide it by 2. I get 21. So we have numbers like 40, 42, and 21. But we also have decimal numbers like pi, right? 3.14159265. That's as far as I know it. I'm working on learning more. That's as much as I know. It's as good as I get. Right, and if I ask for pi, I get 3.14. If I type pi times favorite number, right, I get 131.94 something, something, something. Right. In programming terms, we call these floating point numbers. We call them, right? So you'll hear the term floating point number. Just know that that means a number that has a decimal point and digits afterwards. That's what we mean by floating point numbers.
What was the floating point number again?
So a floating point number is like pi, that has a decimal place and some numbers after the decimal place,
okay.
Right? 4.5 in programming terms is 4.5. That's a floating point number, right? As opposed to 4, which we would call an integer, a number that has no fractional portion, integer. Right? So we have favorite number and we have pi. We know we can multiply these two things together. We also have name. So I don't like that it is the preview anymore because I can't do the like, what do you think this is going to return trick anymore. Like they added this to Chrome and it does a little preview and I can't do my like, what's this going to return? If I ask name, which is a what kind of variable is name here? It's a string. And I ask it to multiply it by a number, JavaScript is going to tell us, I can't do that. Those two things don't go together, right? Unlike peanut butter and chocolate, I don't get a Reese's. I take a number times a string, I get a not a number. I get back, I don't know what that is. So when we're mixing types together, JavaScript is going to tell us I can't do that. That's NaN, not a number. And JavaScript tries to be a very forgiving language. That's one of its greatest benefits, and it's also one of its downfalls. Right? In my program, I'm writing something, and I take two variables and I multiply them together, and they're not compatible, and I end up getting not a number, and that then, right, doesn't make my program stop. But I get a weird value, right? I was expecting kind of a numbery thing. That doesn't mean that JavaScript doesn't have errors. If I say name times favorite number, I get not a number, right? But if I have a typo in here, right, I will get an error. If I say name times fav number, JavaScript's going to give me an error saying, hey, I don't know what this is. I get this big red error. Uncaught reference error. Fav number is not defined. JavaScript, the language is telling me, hey Gavin, you ran a line of code somewhere, And I couldn't do what you asked me to do, not because you gave me two things that were incompatible when you tried to multiply them together. You gave me something I don't even know at all. And I don't know what fave number is, even to try and help you do the thing. Right? So as we start programming in JavaScript, this area right here is going to be one of your best friends. So remember when I said, like, start looking in your editor for, like, the little circle that says you have unsaved files? I'll tell you the number 2 thing that happens when students are like, hey, Gavin, my program's not working besides have you saved it, is have you gotten any errors in your program? Right? Things that make the program stop. When JavaScript gets to one of these errors, it just stops. Right? Everything else in your program, eventually we're going to write lines of programs, not just, you know, interactive things here in the console. Your program just stops. Java's like, hey, something bad happened. I don't know what to do. I'm going to put this error in the console. I'm just going to stop. So usually it's, oh, my program's not working. Oh, I have an error. So when we started working in HTML and CSS, we would tend to leave this little window open so we could get to elements. As you start working in JavaScript, I'm going to suggest you probably leave your inspector open and leave the console tab open. When I'm working on JavaScript applications, I'm pretty much working like this most of the time. Right? With my editor on one side, my browser on the other, and the JavaScript console on the bottom, looking to see if I get any errors or anything pops up here. I'm working with this quite large today just so you can mostly see what's going on here.
So similar to when we're working with the inspector in elements for CSS and HTML, if we wanted to pull up any random website and go to console, we can start manipulating the JavaScript and watch the behavior change. So awesome.
Yep. What you'll find, though, is if you go to something like Google and look at their JavaScript, they'll do what's called obfuscating. So they won't have a variable like name or favorite number. They'll have variables like Q9734R757327. Okay, that's like the name of Google. All right. And they'll do that because all of the code that you write in JavaScript that'll be on the front end is visible to all of the people who come by because your browser has to interpret it and then run it. So some websites will obfuscate it to make it hard for you to see the names of things, but others will not.
Just because they don't want you to experiment?
Yeah, I mean they don't want to kind of make it easier for you to like read how they solved a problem, right? Like when we talked about HTML and CSS, some of you may have gone into the Octocats and seen how they did the little triangle and tried to like copy that code over and what, right? You can't hide the names of the styles and attributes in CSS, but you sure could come up with really hard class names, right? Rather than be like Octocats and what, you could come up with obscure class names to make it less easy for you to like inspect and figure out how they did things.
They just don't want you to cramp their style and like borrow. Yeah,
to a large extent. And it depends on the kind of company. Google will do not necessarily obfuscation, they do minification, right? So Google is to the point where they know every byte on their network costs them a certain amount of money, and every like millisecond that Google takes longer to load, you might change your mind and go to Bing or Yahoo. So they even try and make their code as small as possible. They won't use variable names like name and favorite number. They'll use variable names like N and F because those are shorter, and then JavaScript gets downloaded over the internet. So N saves them 3 letters, 3 bytes on the network, right? But when you're Google and you're serving billions of requests per second, that makes a difference. So sometimes you'll find people will shorten variable names and shorten function names, and sometimes they'll make them harder to use. Cool. Any questions on this so far? Right. For those of you who have done JavaScript before, you'll notice that I'm using let instead of var. How many of you have been var programmers before? Yeah. So everywhere where you've used var before, just start using let for now. And then in a couple of days, when we have a little more context, I'll explain why we're making that shift from var to let. Anybody else who's never done var programming before, yeah, you just get to do let and start with that. Okay, let's talk about how we get information to show up in the console. So let's say you're writing code and you want something to show up in the console. We can ask the console to do things on our behalf. The simplest thing we can ask it to do is log something. So you'll see that this is going to be a pretty common thing, right? And almost in every programming language, this is where we start with getting our programs to output hello world. See, we even have hello world up there. So if you ask console.log parentheses single quote hello world, you'll notice that the console printed out hello world. So we're introducing a couple of ideas here that we're gonna break down over the next little while. I just want you to know that if you ever want your program to be able to output something to the console, the way you do it is console.log. And we're going to end up using console.log quite a bit. It's going to be one of your good friends, console.log. And all it does is takes whatever we give it and has the console printed out. So if we said console.log name, it should just print out whatever your name is. You say console.log name, right? JavaScript will ask first, what is name? Right? For me, it's Gavin. Michelle's probably Michelle, right? Or whatever you assigned it. And then console.log is going to say, okay, cool. You gave me something. I'm gonna do what you asked. I'm gonna print it. Let's talk about one more kind of string. We have name. We have favorite number. Let's say I want to build up a new string and say 42 is the favorite number of Gavin, like so. All right, this is what I want to build. I want to build a string that says that. But if I don't know what the favorite number is or what the name is, I want a way of saying, well, whatever favorite number is, put it right here where the 42 is. And whatever is inside of Gavin, put that where I want the name to go. So there's a couple ways we could do it. Remember when I said we can take name times favorite number, and this is not a number, right? The same thing if we take favorite number times name, but it does understand plus. Notice when I say favorite number plus is the favorite number, it will take the number and put it right inside of the string. And the same thing here with name. Favorite number plus a string is the favorite number of plus name. I do get a string. So when dealing with strings, the plus operator adds things by concatenating them. Right. The string Gavin plus works at SDG takes those two strings and puts them right after each other. So strings can be added together in such a way. And even if we give it a number, JavaScript is smart enough to say, well, he put a number there, but he's adding it to a string. I'm going to turn that number into a string and make it part of the output. You can imagine this gets a little bit verbose. So JavaScript gives us now a new way of doing this, and that is using the type of string that starts and ends with a backwards tick. So this is a single quote, but it's a slanted quote, right? It's the back tick character that's underneath your tilde. So if I type in a string, right, Gavin works at SDG, right, it's just a plain old string. All right, so I said single quotes and double quotes. There's no difference between those. That's almost true for the backticks. So backticks are almost like single quotes or double quotes, except they have a superpower. So with backticks, inside of the backticks, I can ask it to fetch variables for me and make them part of my string. So using the $ and braces, I can put the name of a variable inside of a string. You see what happened here? Inside of a backtick string, the $ braces says, hey JavaScript, I'm building up a string here, but right here, whatever spot I'm in my string, I want you to go off into your memory and go find that variable. And rather than put the actual $ braces, favorite number braces, don't put that in my string. Put the value of whatever's inside a favorite number inside of my string. Is the favorite number of, oh, here's another $. $ braces tells JavaScript inside of a backtick string, go find the value of name and put that inside of my string. Right? And we call this string templates. So you'll hear this called string templating or interpolation. String interpolation. Right? And just about every language has some form of string interpolation. Right? Interpolation meaning we're going to interpret what these values are and place the result inside. Questions?
So up there on line 1, favorite number plus all that, would that wouldn't be considered interpolation, or that's just the old way of interpolation?
So this is string concatenation. So the first example here, we're concatenating. We're taking one thing and we're putting another thing on the end of it, and then we're taking another thing and putting it on the end of that. We're concatenating them, meaning successively adding more and more to something. Concatenating. The second version is called interpolating, where we're building up a string, right, with our backtick superpower strings. And we're saying that inside of that, the $ braces have magic powers. So I get 42 is the favorite number of Gavin. So the $ braces is even more powerful. We can do math inside of here. So inside of the braces isn't just the name of a variable, but it's anything that JavaScript can evaluate. So remember before we said favorite number times 2 and it gave us 84, right, just from the console? We can put those same kinds of things inside of those braces. So it could just be the name of a variable, or it could be a little expression. Favorite number times 2, or favorite number plus 1. Any little expression we can do before, we can put inside of those braces. String interpolation. Cool. Let's look at one more thing, and then we're going to take a quick break, because we're going to go all the way to 12 today, so we can get kind of a good jump start on JavaScript. So we've been doing some statements, and we've been doing a little bit of math. We've learned about a couple different kinds of variables. But you'll notice that each time I want something to happen, I have to like retype that code and have it execute again. So it'd be nice if there was a way that I could give a name to, say this here, right? Favorite number is the favorite number of name. What if there was a way, I want to give that a name. I want to call that something so I can ask for that behavior more than once. The behavior of this code right here is to take whatever favorite number is and what name is and build a new string. The data is 42 in Gavin. The behavior is building up the string. I don't have to keep implementing that over and over again every time I want that behavior. So JavaScript gives us behavior in the idea of functions. Right? And a function, you may have heard it in other languages like a method. A function is just a sequence of statements to be executed that we can call a particular name. Right? It's going to get a little more complicated than that, but that's its basic thing. We're going to say, hey, these sequence of statements, I want you to wrap those up into a chunk of code, a group of code, and I'm going to give you a name that says whenever I say this name, I want you to do those steps. So here's the code we want to have happen. Favorite number is one more than the favorite number of name.
How'd you pull that up so quick?
Oh, the up arrow can go back through all the other things you've written in console, and down arrow goes back. This is the same thing true in your terminal. If you want to go back to things you've typed in terminal before, the up arrow will happen this way, and the down arrow will move you forward. So up arrow to move you back in time, and then the down arrow will move you back closer to now. And then, once you up arrow, you can use the left and right arrow to edit anything. That is true of most every REPL. Will have some kind of command history where you can use the up and down arrow to move back and forth. So this is what I want it to do. Let's think of a name for this. Actually, I wanted the one that's just this. Excuse me. Let's call it, what should we call it? Yeah, let's call it about. I'm going to keep it something small. Let's call it about. Just going to make it short. So I'm going to introduce now another type of variable. We've talked about numbers, strings. Let's talk about another kind of variable called a function. So I can say let about be a function. I'm going to introduce to you the way we're going to write functions, and then I'm going to show you the way you may see them when you Google them, because I'm going to show you the latest way we're teaching functions, and I'm going to show you kind of the historic way, and then in a couple weeks I'm going to tell you why. So I'm going to ask you to start writing functions this way, and then when we get into React and some of those things, I want to tell you why I'm asking you to write them this way. So let's say, you know what? Let's take a step back just a second. I want to show you without a complication. So let's say there's a greet function, and what I want the greet function to do is just to say hello world. Let's do this. So here's hello world. Remember our hello world? So I want to do a more simple version first. Let's do a function that does this instead. Before we deal with the favorite numbers thing, I want a function that just says hello world to me, but I want to have to keep writing console log. Let's do this first. So let's make a new function. We're going to make a new variable. We're going to call it greet. And greet is going to be a function. And notice, like when we had a variable, like a number here or a string, right? This was the syntax for doing it. The syntax for a function starts out like this. Right? Everything up to the equal sign is what we've seen before, right? Like let favorite number equal to. We put a number on this side. On this side, we're doing a function. And a function, like I said, is a sequence of code. So it starts with this weird syntax. We're going to talk about why that syntax is that way in a second. But inside of the braces will be the code we're going to run. So inside of these braces here, right, again, braces is going to be the code we're going to run. And like our other variables, like name or favorite number, JavaScript now knows about greet. Right? Like it knows name and favorite number, it knows what greet is. Greet is equal to, and it's showing us here our function. Right? If you were still typing that, it was let greet equal to. I'm going to put an underscore there because I can't assign it twice. If you're still typing this, it's the same thing. Don't put this little underscore there. Let greet equal to this.
So when we type a variable name to the console, especially as far as like greet, which is now a function, we're not actually calling the function. We're just saying, tell us what greet is. Right?
Just like when we said let name equal to Gavin, we're not asking what Gavin is, we're telling. So in this case, when we say let greet equal to, we're not asking for it to do what the function says to do. We're telling JavaScript, I'm teaching you a new behavior. The behavior I'm teaching you is that every time I say greet, I want you to console log hello world. That's the behavior we're teaching, like training a dog, right? I wish I had trained my dog. We tried to train her that like when we rang a bell near the door, it meant it's time to like go out, so that she would come and ring the bell. She never learned it. We're teaching JavaScript here. Like she just comes and stares at me. That's what she does, which is her signal for everything. Hungry, go out, pet me. We're teaching JavaScript here that when I say greet, I want you to do this. So this is the syntax for how we define it. And the way we ask for it is we say greet and 2 parentheses.
I'm having trouble defining greet. I keep getting errors when I type it in.
Okay, so it should look like this. Let me get rid of this. It should look like this. Yeah. So it's let greet equal open and close parentheses, another equals and a greater than, and braces.
So after I get the braces, what do I mean?
A new line. Just press enter. And then you can say console log hello. And then you'll do another enter, and you'll put a closing brace here. Cool. Did anybody else have a challenge getting greet defined this way? Okay. Let's see what yours is. It said you once. Okay. So if you got an error that says already defined, did anybody get an error that says this is already defined? Because that's what Michelle got. So yeah, ignore the underscore for you. So eyes up front, Toby, eyes up front because this is important. So if I try and run this again, I'm going to get the error that Michelle got, which is identifier greet has already been declared. Once you've let a variable, you can't let the variable again. Right. So if you've already let greet equal to, and it says it's already been declared, it's saying you've already taught me what greet is. Right? So we can't teach it again.
Even with the same information.
Correct. So for instance, if I try and say let name now equal to Jason, it won't let that variable again. But I can change the variable by leaving the let keyword off. So you let a variable once, but you can change it by leaving off the let and just saying now name equals Jason. So let is when we teach JavaScript that something is defined, and then we can redefine it just by assigning it again. So if you got an error because you tried to do greet twice, you'll get this error. It just means that you taught JavaScript what greet is. If I happen to refresh my browser, like so, you'll notice that name is gone. Right? Refreshing the browser reloads all of JavaScript, and all of my variables like favorite, number, and such are gone. So if you ever get like, I don't know what's going on, right, when you're working in console, you can always just reload the browser and it will wipe JavaScript's memory and you can define again. What's nice is if you reload the browser, you can still up arrow. It doesn't erase that. It doesn't erase your history. It just erases what's live inside of JavaScript's brain. So let's see. This is how we define a function, greet. And to call it, we put the 2 open and close parentheses on the end. So this here is defining the function. Hey, JavaScript, I would like you to do some work for me. This is what I'm going to teach you this behavior. And then greet with 2 parentheses calls it. So you notice when I ask greet, I end up getting console log. What JavaScript is doing is saying, hey, let's go into that function and do what that function said to do. When we say greet and the parentheses, we are asking asking JavaScript to say, hey, let me go take a look at the code Gavin gave me between those two braces and just do whatever it says, right? So running greet with parentheses is the same as just running the code that says console log help and printing something out, right? But what if we wanted the greeting to have some more information, right? Remember my, let's put my name back in here. And let's put my favorite number back in here. I'm just doing this because I reloaded the browser and these things are gone. If you remember, we had a more complicated thing, which was being able to print 42 as the favorite number of Gavin. Right? What if we wanted the greeting to be more complicated and require information from the outside world? Right? I would like there to be a new greeting that would say, hello world, or hello person's name, your favorite number is, and what that person's favorite number is. So now I need information. My function needs stuff. It needs data, information, in order to do its work. This is the idea of passing arguments to a function. Let's make another function called personal greeting. So personal greeting is going to be a function. So it's going to start with parentheses, but now I need information into my function. This behavior, personal greeting, needs two things. It needs two things to come in. We're going to call these arguments, and they go inside of the parentheses. So just like when we assign variable names, I need to call them something. I'm going to call them person name and person number. And you notice that I separate them by a comma. So we're telling JavaScript let, so it knows new stuff's coming. Personal greeting is the name of the variable, equals. And when JavaScript sees the parentheses here, it says a function is coming. Question? Oh, no. Okay. So inside of the parentheses, I'm going to tell JavaScript that these are the things I need from the outside world. Hey, this is telling JavaScript every time someone asks for personal greeting, it's going to receive two little bits of information. Two variables are going to come in that I can then use inside of my function. So let's finish the function with this little arrow and a brace. So JavaScript is now waiting for me to type the rest of my function. Let's declare another variable inside of this function. So we're inside of this function, we're going to make another variable. And we're going to use our backticks. Remember, our backticks are our strings with superpowers. So I'm going to say, hello, person name, your favorite number is person number. I'm going to make my font a little bit smaller so it fits all one line. So the very first thing now that our behavior is going to do, called personal greeting, is it's going to make its own little variable. Hello, person name. Your favorite number is person number. And we're going to put that little temporary result into a variable called message. So functions can have their own variables that belong just to them. This variable here just belongs to person greeting. Then once I've created that variable, I can say, hey, console log, I want you to print out whatever's inside of message. Then let's let that be the last thing that our function does. So as you're typing, let's go over this one more time. Let tells JavaScript something's coming. I'm going to define for you a new variable you haven't seen before. It's called personal greeting. What kind of thing is it after the equal sign? It's not a number and it's not a string. We're going to learn a couple other variable types. But the parentheses tells it, aha, this is going to be a function. This is going to be behavior. And this time, inside of the parentheses, I don't have nothing. I have two variables. I decided to call person name and person number. And the arrow and the braces are where the behavior is going to be defined. This is where we tell JavaScript, every time we say personal greeting, what do you want it to do? Every time we say personal greeting, what we're telling JavaScript is make a new variable called a message and make it equal to an interpolated or templated string, hello, whatever's inside a person name, your favorite number is whatever's inside a person number. Put that in a variable called message and print it out. So let's call this function. Let's ask for this behavior to happen. Personal greeting. Also notice that autocomplete works here. PERS tab. Nice. Let's call this function. And you would think that I would put it double quotes like this, but inside of the open and close parentheses, this is where the arguments come into the function. So there's two arguments. The first one is the person name, and the second one is the person number. I notice how very nicely the console kind of tells me which thing is which. So somebody give me a name. And what was Jackie Kennedy's favorite number? 10. So you'll notice I put them in the same order here that I put them up here. Right? The very first thing that I put when I'm calling the function, the very first thing before the comma becomes the first variable name that fills in person name. So Jackie Kennedy goes into person name and 10 goes into number, all inside of the parentheses when we're calling a function. Anybody want to guess what's going to happen when I press enter?
I'm going to say hello, Jackie Kennedy.
Your favorite number is?
10.
Hello, Jackie Kennedy, your favorite number is 10. Let's call it again. Personal greeting. What do you think this is going to say?
Hello, Jason Perry.
It's 100. Right? So now I have a behavior that changes based on what I supply it. The behavior of personal greeting is, give me a name and a number, and I will greet that person by saying, hello, whatever their name is, your favorite number is person number. What do you think this is going to output if I ask for person name? Yeah, how many people think Jason Perry?
Yeah, Jason Perry.
How many people think Jackie Kennedy? How many people think something else? Cool. What do you think that something else is going to be?
Got reference error.
Yes, an uncaught reference error. Person name, right? So person name is only known to personal greeting. This person name variable here only exists while we're running that function. While JavaScript is executing that function, that's when person name is known. Because what we told personal greeting is, the very first thing you give me in that list inside of the parentheses is what I'm going to call person name, but only while personal greeting is happening. As soon as personal greeting is done, poof, I've forgotten what person name is. Same thing with person number. As soon as this function is done, right, I've given up what person number is. It's all that these variable names here tell us is that while this behavior is happening, slide Jackie Kennedy into that variable, slide 10 into that variable, do this behavior, and then let go of those variables. Right, so Jason Perry becomes person name, 100 becomes person number, we do this work, and then we let go of those variables. Right, they only happen while this behavior is happening. What about message? Try that. What do you think Same thing. Oh, and even it didn't even happen because it tried to autocomplete it into message, right? Hey, I don't know what message is because it's only defined inside of that function. While that function is happening, we've taught it what message is, and as soon as that function is done, we let go of what message is. All of these variables, person name, person number, message, are what we call scoped to that function. They only exist while that function is running. When we ask for that behavior, those variables exist. We use them while that function is running, and as soon as the function is running, we let go of them. So this is this idea in a short way of the concept of data and behavior. Right. We have 3 data things on this screen and 1 behavior. Right. Our 3 data things are person name, person number, and message. And we have 1 behavior that is personal greeting. Right. The 2 things, person name and person number, are what we call arguments. Right. Not in terms of like fighting with somebody. You'll also hear them called parameters. In some languages, JavaScript tends to call them arguments. You can call them whatever you want, but there are times when calling them arguments is going to be important, but not right now. So just get in the habit of calling them arguments. Those are things that come into this behavior we call personal greeting. And then messages are last bit of data that we compute inside of that function by building up the string. So data are things that we can gather from the user. They are information we can pass around our program, or things that we can compute by doing multiplication, addition, subtraction, division, computing strings. And when we get back from break, we're going to learn about another couple of kinds of variables to make up data.
If we use var instead of the let in the message, would that declare message outside of the local scope of the function? So like
no. So
only, okay.
var is function scoped.
Even if it's okay.
Yeah. The challenge with var is that it's function scoped, and if it's not inside of a function, then it's file scoped. Let is always brace scoped. For those who know what var and let is always scoped to the most inner block. So that will make sense when we get to things like for loops, and when we get to things like functions inside of functions. There's really very little case now for var. There's very few times where var is needed, where let doesn't work and is a better choice. So what we're teaching now is let's just use let, and for like the 1 time out of 500 that var actually is the right choice, we'll use var. But let in its style gets rid of errors and some sloppy programming that var tends to induce. So if you're a past var person, pretty much everywhere where you've ever typed var, you could probably type let and it will work just as well.
What do you mean var is function scope?
So I will talk about that offline,
Okay.
because for folks who know what var and let are, we can talk about that outside, because
Okay.
if I describe what it is, it will confuse all the people who are just now learning let.
Okay.
There's a very subtle difference in the way we used to describe JavaScript variables. We used to use the word var instead of let, and it has a very subtle difference. And for the folks who have ever done JavaScript before, that might make sense. And I'm happy to talk about it like a review at 2 or after hours. Cool. So we've learned a couple things. We know that JavaScript has this idea of variables, which are names for values that we can ask JavaScript to remember. We've learned a couple types of variables: numbers, floating points, which are our decimals or our fractional numbers, strings. This is kind of our data. And then behavior, which is our idea of functions, where functions are just groupings of statements that we do in sequence. We can give them a name. We can name that behavior and then ask for that behavior at any time. we have our greet. That is a function that takes how many arguments? None. Takes no arguments, and what does it do? Yeah, it just says hello on the world. Right? So if I ask for greet, and I ask for it by putting 2 parentheses after it, see what happens if I don't put any parentheses after it? What I mean by greet is the function itself. Right? That's what's inside of that variable. Greet without any parentheses is the function. I'm asking JavaScript, hey, what is greet? And JavaScript is like, hey, I know what greet is. It's a function, and this is what it does. Right? If you just ask for the function without the parentheses, JavaScript will tell you what the function is. Hey, I know what greet is. It's a function that takes no arguments. And when you call it, it'll say hello world. But if I put the parentheses afterwards, I'm asking JavaScript, I don't want you to tell me what greet is. Please do what greet is. There's a very subtle difference that will become important in a little bit. A little bit today, but even more so next week. Right? Just know that if you ask for the name, if you give a variable name that has a function in it, we'll tell you what the function is. Parentheses will call it. And then we have personal greeting. Well, that's a function that's a little bit more complex. That's a behavior that takes 2 arguments. It takes person name and it takes person number. And when you call it, it's going to make another variable temporarily called message by interpolating backticks. Hello, person name, your favorite number is whatever's inside person number, and then logs that. And now we can call personal greeting. I don't even know what Tony's favorite number is, but let's say it's 400. And if I say personal greeting Gavin and 42, right? That behavior now adapts itself to whatever arguments I give it. Right? So now the behavior is more dynamic. When we had greet, it just prints hello and returns. To customize that behavior, I need to give it some information. And in this case, I give it a name and a number, and we get a slightly different behavior. This is the most fundamental aspect of programming. Data and behavior. Pretty much everything that we do, no matter what language you're doing it in, whether it's JavaScript or C# or Ruby or Python or Haskell or Go, is data and behavior. Right? Information that we collect or compute or generate, and the things that we can do to that data. Right? Multiply it, output it, combine it together, split it apart. Right? It's just manipulating data. And everything we do from here is just building more and more complex behavior and more complex kinds of data. But this is the core nugget that we learn, and then everything else we're going to build out from here. So since we're going to go all the way to 12, let's take a break. Let's come back at let's take a 15-minute break. Let's come back at 11, and then we're going to talk about another couple of types of data that JavaScript can hold on to, and then we'll talk about the ability to interact with the page. Right? We've seen how we can output something to the console. We're going to see how we can interact with the web page itself. Cool. Let's come back at 11.